And we're live. How's it going, guys?
Yay, I'm great.
Awesome. Thanks.
So hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone watching today. This is a live stream, which means unlike other shows, other podcasts and all those things, you can participate. You can ask questions. We can throw up those questions on board. But I'm super excited to do this. And essentially, we wanted to create this series for teaching all the basics, all the things that you need to know for podcasting. This can be scary. It can be weird to sort of dive in, right? But our goal is to make this smooth, easy. I'm with some pros here with me today, and I'd like to introduce them. So first off, we have Dr. Mike Wu Ming, MD, MPH. He's a physician, entrepreneur. He is a multiple practice owner, investor, and marketing strategist. He's responsible for the development and success of several seven-figure online and traditional brick and mortar companies. Dr. Mike Wu Ming received a Doctor of Medicine from Wayne State University, a master's degree in public health at the University of Michigan, and he completed family medicine residency at Mayo Clinic. He is the author of The Positioned Physician, Earn More, Work Smart, and Love Medicine Again. He's now semi-retired. He has stopped and started different podcasts nearly 10 years ago and now hosts the Bootstrap MD podcast, which is a weekly podcast with over 130 episodes. And, Dr. Mike Wu Ming, thank you so much for being on the show. Seriously.
Thanks, Taylor. Always looking forward to when you put us on the hot seat.
And Dr. Kelly Casperson, she's a urologist who loves teaching about female pelvic and sexual health and telling women over and over again that they are not broken. The podcast has 175,000 downloads in less than 2 years, which, by the way, is amazing. And she is consistently in the top 50 in Apple under sexuality and ranks in the top in this category worldwide. Dr. Kelly Casperson, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
So, guys, let's start this off. Again, I want this to be super fun for those watching. You can throw up questions, comments, all those great things. But this podcast and this video series is diving deep into podcasts, right? And our first question, the first episode, is what I wish I knew sooner about podcasting. So I'm going to keep this really broad in the beginning. But Dr. Kelly Casperson, let's start with you. What do you wish were some of the things you wanted to know sooner about this process?
It's a tricky question because, in the coaching world, everything happens exactly when it happens for a reason, right? So it's a trick question for me. I've learned so much. You learn so much by doing it. And it's like every phase you are in it, you just learn more and more and you continue to grow. So I think that's what I didn't know. I didn't know how much it would improve my life by becoming a podcaster.
So you would say that definitely since starting, your life has improved.
Oh, yeah.
And I definitely want to dig into that, but let's hop over to Dr. Mike Wu Ming for a second. Mike, what do you think are some of the things that you wish you knew sooner through this process?
So interesting to me, this is on my third incarnation of a podcast. I started two other podcasts. One probably lasted maybe 40 to 50 episodes. The second one probably just like half a dozen episodes. And this one, as you mentioned, my Bootstrap MD podcast is close to 140 now. And what I think when I had issues with my other podcasts was when I did one with a partner, and that added some difficulty, especially if you and the partner, although I love the guy, he had some different values and different goals that he wanted to use the podcast for. So I think for me, it was like, if you want to start a podcast, I really think, first start with yourself, because sometimes, just like as you have a partner with a business, it can be pretty difficult. And then the second thing is really kind of defining your niche. As we have so many podcasts out there, there's hundreds of thousands of different podcasts, you can kind of get lost. So you definitely want to spend some time looking at your niche. And especially, I think, one thing that was important for me was finding great guests in that particular niche. For my podcast, I do it kind of half-half. Half the time I'm just talking or rambling, for a half hour. Other times, I like to have guests to kind of break it up and get different perspectives. So those are a couple of things that, my first thoughts about, thinking about when you're getting into a podcasting.
Yeah, and I want to hop over to Kelly for a second because, I think you really, and this is really piggybacking off of what Mike said, I think you really found a niche or niche that really fits with who you are. What do you think kind of, what helped you develop your idea? And I know in the beginning, I'm sure, just like all of us were, it was really nerve-wracking to start. What do you think allowed you to have that initial fire? Like, how did you develop your idea?
Yeah, well, I'm a urologist, and I started seeing female sexual dysfunction, not something you're even taught in urology, right? But I just started seeing it over and over, and it was actually two things. Number one, boredom of like saying the same stuff over and over and over again, and you're like, nobody knows this, right? And realizing like you can't change the world by just seeing people in clinic. And then number two is I had a voice in my head, and she was like, you got to get it out there. You've got to talk. You've got to get louder. And I'm like, you're super annoying. Who are you? Like, how do I get rid of this voice? And then starting the podcast and the voice goes away, and realizing, and like the work I've done is like that voice is your future self, like telling you and calling you forward of what you have to do. And I totally agree with that niche. Like for me, female sexuality is number one. If you want to get to the top of Apple charts fast, like be a doctor talking about sex, because there's literally nobody talking about it. I like to think I'm high quality and funny, but like my niche is very good for getting up there. And I see all these doctors and they're like, I want a podcast about wellness. And I'm like, you're a dime a dozen at this point, and like, unless you're already famous, and feel free to argue with me, but like, unless you're already famous, like starting a podcast about wellness, like it's a little saturated. But if you're like divorced, mothers who love CrossFit, who just need to eat better, like niche down and you will find your audience. So I just made that niche up. But yeah, like niche down, and then you'll really have something. But if you're like, I want to talk about like eating healthy, like you're probably not going to find your audience.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, first of all, you already had like a passion for this, right? Like you're a urologist, you felt this, you literally had the voice screaming at you to do this thing. And then on top of it, what you're saying is if you want to develop the idea, maybe do some research, see if like your concept or idea is out there. If there's a lot of those podcasts out there, maybe thinking about how you can get more specific or hit certain pain points or topics that aren't being hit yet. That's if you want to be big and rich and famous. The other idea, though, I mean, to counter your point a little bit, and I'd like to hear Mike's thoughts as well, is sometimes even if you're not like quote niche down, let's say you're a burnout expert or you want to do health and wellness, how can you brand it, or how can you say it in a way where it's uniquely yours and that excites those people, even if it is a little bit more general, but you kind of give it your unique flavor or whatever it is. People will always, in my opinion, be attracted to you as a person, right? I don't think people really listen to podcasts just for the idea. I also think besides just the niche, which is very important, by the way, I think they're also listening to you, for example, because they love you, right, Kelly? Like, I think they listen to it and they like how you talk about things. They think you're funny. There's something that attracts them to you. So even if it's not, in my opinion, 100% totally niche down, although I think it's a huge advantage. Don't get me wrong. I think also it's okay if you're not sure yet and you just dive in. But Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I could see both sides to it. But I think what you need to have is, like, if you want to go into wellness, you definitely need to have a hook of some type to really, brand yourself, whether it's a unique name, a unique experience. But if you just start out and say, I want a wellness podcast, like you said, there's tons of them out there. But maybe there is, some for maybe a specific group, as Kelly mentioned, working moms or whatever that could be, teens. I don't know what that is. Also, I think too, when deciding on a podcast, is that I think is really important is, what are you doing it for? What is it? I know some doctors who I work in, like, help doctors start up their own practice. Are they doing it so they can market their practice better? Well, that's going to be very defined. If you're in Boise, Idaho, and you just want to focus on wellness in Boise, Idaho, If you're doing it because you're going to be rich and famous, I may have a truth bomb to you. It's probably not going to happen overnight. But, for me, why I started the podcast is like, I'm very curious, and the podcast allows me to reach guests that perhaps I wouldn't be able to reach, simply because, I'm in the entrepreneurship space. There's always like a new launch, a new program, a new book that wants to get promoted. And so, we get lots of opportunities to reach out to these guests, people that I'm interested and I want to know more about. But it could be, as Kelly was saying, she had something to say, and the podcast allows her megaphone to really spread her message.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of what you're saying, Mike, a little bit. You don't have to be rich and famous, or you don't have to want to have that desire to be rich and famous. Although you could be long term. The idea just has to be with this sort of innate, I think, feeling that you have something to say, or that you have something you want to talk about. Or maybe it could just be that you have questions, right? Like maybe for me, like I'm interested in the environment, but I don't know too much about how to get into that. Maybe I'd throw a podcast in where I talk about, the globe. How do I have an impact on the environment? Like maybe I get some experts on to talk about that. It could just be for your own innate, questions and interests. But the other thing that I think is really important, I believe, about podcasting is it's kind of like CME. It's kind of like continued medical education, but for your life. It's like continued life education, right? Because you can have on absolutely anyone you want in the world. And I don't know if you guys agree with me on this, but I've had a really easy time getting really great guests that I thought were totally unreachable. Have you guys had that experience of being able to maybe reach out to people that you didn't even think were possible?
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's like what's super fun about it for me. And I think what my challenge now is like, I got to increase my ask, because I'm like, everybody I ask says yes. So I'm like, I got to start asking to get some no's as just part of growth on that. But right now I released a podcast today with Dr. Lori Mintz, and she's very, very huge in the female sexual health world. Everybody, like anybody who's anybody, knows that she's got a book you have to read, right? And so I'm like, I get to be a platform for her, right? And so like you kind of amplify each other, but then like amongst my groups, I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys, I got to like hang out with Lori Mintz, then you're friends, right? And so she's actually doing a book club with me on Tuesday for female physicians only, because I know her and she's my friend now because she came on my podcast. And I'm like, hey, you want to show up to this book club I'm doing? And she's like, yes. So it's like, that's how your life changes. Like you're just like, your world explodes. It's so cool.
Could you have imagined that before starting? Could you have imagined having someone at that status, maybe like just being a friend and like, hey, can you hop in?
No, like and that's the other thing I think about podcasting that doctors don't realize. It elevates your expertise in the field, right? Because for me, I'm like, I didn't do a fellowship in female sexual medicine because that's how doctors think, right? Like I didn't do the fellowship, but I'm like, dude, I have the podcast on female sexual medicine now. And I went to this, random not female sex med urology conference. And like doctors come up to me and they're like, oh my gosh, it's so exciting to meet you. I totally want to say hi. I listen to your podcast. I give it to my patients. And my reps are like, you're kind of famous here. And, like you didn't expect that to happen, of like people want to come up and say hi to you because you have this product now that you do. And I'm like, it's so fun. Like that's like, number 2 is like, just do it. It's so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Mike, I want to ask you, has anything unexpectedly like great or anything unexpected evolve from you doing podcasts that you didn't even imagine would happen?
Yeah, I mean, like Kelly said, it just really introduces you to different people. And since we're kind of like name dropping, like next week I'm interviewing Kevin from Kevin MD. So he's probably one of the biggest doctors that is out there, and so it just opens up new doors. And I think one of the coolest things that I enjoy about having a podcast is when I'd go to conferences and I would get something like, and I'm sure Kelly's had the same experience. I'm listening to you when I'm exercising or I'm jogging or I'm walking my dog, and it's like I hear your voice. there. And then sometimes, when we're doing this, we're just like, I'm just talking in like my studio, my my basement, and you don't realize how much, I guess, influence that you can have. And I think another thing too is I get feedback from like episodes that I've done like a year and a half ago, and we're always kind of thinking like, what's going on right now, what's current, and then you realize, that episode you did in like episode 12 that I don't remember what it is, and like, yeah, I recorded that and I got so much out of it. That's really cool experience.
Yeah. It's kind of strange, right? You could actually, you could have been a totally different person back then, but for whoever was listening to that podcast episode at that time, it really impacted them.
I don't remember anything before COVID anyway. So,
well, I mean, yeah, that's a whole different discussion, right? Like, yeah, it's interesting too. It's almost also a digital collage, right? Like if I listen to my episode 1, I was like a third year in med school. And so it's just really funny to go back and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm so bad at this. And like, it's really embarrassing. And also like, I know, as you guys, I'm sure did when you started, like I had a list of questions and like, I could almost hear myself like as if I'm reading off the question, like it's so obvious. Right. So yeah, it's funny. So I want to hop over to like a different kind of question, but still in the realm of what we're talking about. Do you think it's worth creating a podcast today?
It's different for everybody, it's don't do it for anybody else besides you. That's for sure. Like do it. 'Cause to me, I'm like, this is the creative outlet that was missing in my life. And like, I truly believe now everybody has to do something creative, as far as being human. And to me, it's podcasting. It's crazy how creative it is. But like, do you have to have a podcast? No. And I think the other thing, like I'll read an amazing book. I won't name names. I read this amazing book, listen to her podcast. I think she's horrible podcasting. Like I can't even stand her voice, right? And same, like there's great podcasters and you read their book and you're like, nah, they're not great. So like, I think it is just like, if you like to write. If you like to talk. So it's like, you don't have to do anything.
Mike, what do you think? Do you think it's worth creating a podcast today?
I'm going to kind of agree with Kelly. It's like based upon what you feel you're best at. Like for me, I can like ramble on on something, but I can, if you put me in front of Microsoft Word and you want me to like write a book or write an article, I'm going to sit there for probably about good 10, 15 minutes trying to figure out what I'm going to talk about. It also really depends on like what, again, I'm going to kind of go back to this, is like, what are you doing the podcast for? For me, this is an extension of me to produce content. It actually forces me to produce content on a weekly basis. And I think out of, talk about being surprised, I think that's what, for me, has been the most interesting part of it and value that I've gotten out of it. Because I'm going to tell you, some days I don't feel like putting out a podcast episode, but I know that, come Thursday, Friday, and I don't have anything, I release them on Saturday, I don't have anything out there, I got to start like working. And so when I had my other podcast, there'd be like weeks or months sometimes before an episode would come on. And, really the name of the game is consistency into doing these. If you want to get a podcast that people want to listen to, you have to do it on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's a good advice, I think, for people who are listening, who are like, what does it take? It's like, you do it. If you want to see your baby grow, you do have to be consistent. And whether that means you batch it or you have a day that you do, whatever it means to be consistent, I think you hear that over and over again in podcasting.
Yeah, and that actually, what you're saying right now actually leads perfectly into my next question for you guys, which is, what are mistakes you made previously, or what are maybe some thinking errors or actually execution errors that you made earlier that maybe now you've improved upon, but you wish you kind of just did sooner?
Mike, you go first. I'm still thinking.
Well, you said this will be about 30 minutes, so I don't want to. In terms of mistakes, I think there's a couple things that I did. I think when I was like got into podcasting, I thought I had to get like the best sounding equipment, and I got to pay $1,000 for a microphone, and I've got to have like a room and really just make it soundproof and all that. And really now, just because the technology is better, and a lot of these microphones that you can get, are pretty inexpensive. I don't think you have to, buy all this really expensive equipment costing an arm and leg to do it. What I do think that, mistakes that I made was just like actually listening to your podcast episode, because the mistakes that I did is, a few things that I did was when you're interviewing a guest, and this is probably common sense to you, Taylor, because you're really big on this, is like, I'm listening to it, and then I'm realizing like my guest, I can barely hear them, and I'm like bellowing over on a loud voice, and just like spending the time just level your audio voices to make it consistent, because it's all about not only having a good content, but actually having a good audio experience for the listener. So those are a couple things I can just think of.
Yeah, production quality is something that you get better with over time, because again, like you could start podcasting and have a great conversation, but if your audio's not effective, or you didn't think about the experience of who you're welcoming on. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but let's hop over to Kelly. What are some mistakes or things that you wish you knew sooner?
I think a lot of doctors, they want to be perfect at the beginning. And I need an editor. I need the perfect mic. I need the perfect soundproofing. I need the perfect niche. I need like, there's so many perfects that prevent people from just putting out a product. And you're going to get better. Like probably episode 50, I was like, I think I got this now. Right. You get better at interviewing. Now I can interview anybody about anything at this point. Like I love it. I'm good at it. I'm comfortable in front of the camera and mic. I think exactly what Mike said about the sound is I'm starting to get more picky on my guests of like, you need good audio if you want to come on my podcast. Like the product is audio, right? Like unless you're going to do a part for YouTube or something like that, like your product is audio. And like, if they're coming with bad Wi-Fi on a cell phone with like no mic, and you can tell like, cause I'll interview podcasters and like their mic, they're set, they're good. And so it's so fun to interview with podcasters cause they've got all the stuff. Certainly not criteria, but like I'm starting to be a little more picky cause I'm caring about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The audio thing is interesting. I'll give you guys like a little funny story. Like one of my like best episodes I ever did, like it was just like a crazy awesome content. And it was great, except my fire alarm in my house, kept going off because I didn't change the batteries. So every like 20 seconds, it's it's doing the screeching. And so I'm like, I mean, pardon my French, I'm having this kick-ass conversation. It's amazing, right? It's going so well. And then every 20 seconds, and I'm like, oh, and it still did amazing. So I think something else to say is, even if your audio quality isn't 100%, if it's even 80%, but you have this awesome rapport and a great guest, even then it can still execute. And that one, like, I'm not even kidding, at that time, 3x, 4x my normal downloads, right? So, but yeah, for sure, audio is super, super important. What are, and I mean, going off of that, are there any funny stories or any funny moments where you just totally blew it and it was fine?
I lost a recording. Like everybody loses a recording, right? And so I finally lost one, and I was like, duh. And luckily it was with another doctor who is a podcaster. And so like, then you have to be like, I'm so sorry, I've lost the recording. And she's like, it happened to me too. And like, we redid it, and the redo interview was even better than the original, I swear. But like, don't worry, you'll lose a recording at some point. Like the tech gods, it's like losing a sock in the laundry. Like it just happens.
Yeah, same kind of thing. I did one where I thought it would be fancy, and my guest was actually in town, so I actually had him into my studio, and then we're going to go, okay, we'll take advantage, we'll do video on this, and I got it recorded, and the content was great. We went through an hour, and then realized we lost the recording is gone. It went into the universe, and he was kind enough to just like do it over again, but you could tell I was like, I was kind of simmering and just mad at myself that, I felt so bad that he drove here and we did all this, but it actually turned out fine.
Yeah, it's no fun when you have like a loss of the episode. I have another story kind of in the same lines. I had an interview with John Lee Dumas, JLD from Entrepreneurs on Fire. He's like a really big deal. And this guy, he schedules interviews with people. He only will give 15 minutes. Like this guy's a machine. So it's either you make it to the appointed time. And so I'm interviewing him, right? But for this episode, for some reason, I thought it would be better because it looked cooler at my friend's place. So I went over to his apartment complex and I set up my laptop, and then the internet in the building wasn't working. So then I had to switch over, and I eventually got the 5 minutes with him on my cell phone. And literally the podcast episode was, I only got 2 questions with him. And this guy is like the biggest person I've ever had on my show. I literally only could ask him 2 questions. And it was like, I was so embarrassed. Like I felt like such a loser like the rest of the day. But it happens, and it's fine. So yeah, it's surprisingly, like, even though it's really embarrassing, like I feel like, and you guys can tell me too, you kind of need those mistakes to then realize what you can do better.
Yeah, totally. Same with audio, same with, lighting, same with like red lipstick looks amazing on camera. I never wear red lipstick in real life, but like, you just learn stuff like that and you kind of play and grow, and it's fun.
So holistically, I kind of want to round this out, but if you could give yourselves, a previous self, a statement on podcasting, what would be something you wish you told yourself? Whether it's a tip, a trick. I know that's kind of like a hard question to answer, but what would be a statement you would tell a former self about this process?
For me, I think it was template it. Make things automated as best you can. I mean, I didn't start, when I would do a podcast, I didn't start giving like an email for my guests about what they need to do. Make sure your audio is good. Be in a quiet room. Make sure you get a drink of water. If you want me to put sample questions, let me know beforehand. And because I was typing the same email again and again, and why can't I just like do this? And so they're prepared. And when we're ready to go, we're ready to go. So anything that I can do in terms of automating it. And when it gets to a time, the second thing is when it gets to a time where you can actually might get some income from it or devote more time to it, hire somebody to do some of the things, whether, editing it or promoting it on social media, those stuff that like, we have to do because we have to do it. I don't particularly enjoy doing it, but I have people to help me to do that. So automating it, for me, I use like a Calendly to schedule my guests. So I'm not doing that back and forth that I was doing for a while. The noises, use technology, use the automation. It's your friend. It'll help you out with your podcast for sure.
Kelly, what do you think?
Oh man, that's great advice. I definitely have hacks now. Like I'm on episode 109 today. So I have hacks now that I didn't have, but like learning is part of the process. And I think it's really like, I've embraced, I am not perfect. I make mistakes. Like the editing's not always great, but like I listen to top podcasters and Mike, you probably like, you'll pick up their mistakes now too, right? Because you're just so much more trained. Like you'll hear things or you'll be like, that audio needs to blah, blah, blah. Like you learn by doing it. I think it's just an incredible like arena for personal growth and not being perfect and learning by doing. And like, I love it. And I love podcasters now, right? Which is why I'm showing up today. But like, I love doctors who podcast at this point. It's like a whole new group of friends that I didn't have before I started podcasting. So that's really cool too.
And
just to kind of follow up on it too, is like, I listened to a podcast, pretty well-known podcast. And I won't give the name, but we're like, we need to do that part over. Okay, all right, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's on the podcast. So they missed that editing, and they didn't make mention of it. It just went on. Life didn't end. So you're going to continue to make mistakes. I know I'm going to continue to make mistakes, but that's being human, right? It's part of life. Things are going to happen. The world won't end because you didn't edit it wrong, or such. So.
Well, guys, we're coming up on time. So for the sake of time, I would love for you guys, if you have a pitch or anything that you wanted to let listeners know about yourselves, where can they find you? We'll start with Mike.
Oh, you want me to pitch? Oh,
Well, you don't
no.
have to do a formal pitch, but like, where can people find out
No,
about?
I was kidding. I'm used to pitching stuff. Yeah, you can find me at bootstrapmd.com. Bootstrapmd gets around to my brand. We talk anything physician entrepreneurship, whether you want to start an online business, whether you want to start your own podcast, or whether you want to start your own cash-based practice. That's probably the best place to start.
And Kelly?
You can find me at kellykaspersonmd.com. I'm also on Instagram at kellykaspersonmd. The podcast is You Are Not Broken, and the book You Are Not Broken, Stop Shitting All Over Your Sex Life is going to come out in 2022.
That is an amazing title. And
for
myself, guys, I just want to say that SoMeDocs, or Doctors on Social Media, we're doing a build a podcast service. So as you're listening to these episodes and these guests, let's say this feels like a bit too much or you don't know where to start. I'll be coaching and we'll be building out your podcast. So feel free to reach out to Doctors on Social Media, SoMeDocs, myself, Taylor Brana, or Donna Coriel. This was an awesome conversation, guys. I'm sure we could do like 20 of these. If you guys ever want to hop on or, trade podcasts or anything like that, just let me know. I'm super excited to have you guys. So, all right.
Always a pleasure, Taylor. Thanks so much.
Thank you.